How many times have you seen a person sleeping on a park bench, searching through a dumpster for food scraps, or pushing a shopping cart loaded with their belongings down a street and wondered, who is that person? Why are they homeless? Over the next 3 nights, I'll bring you a special series of reports on the homeless. I'll look at the problem from a national perspective and the local situation. Tonight, an overview of homelessness in America. They've been called America's Forgotten, the men and women who spend their days, their nights, their lives living on the streets. It's impossible to know exactly how many people are homeless. Estimates range from 250,000 to 3 million in the USA alone. However, most of those who deal with the homeless say 3 million is probably the most accurate figure. If that's so, 1 out of every 80 Americans lives on the streets. As you might expect, the experts say the cities with the biggest homeless problem are New York City and Los Angeles. For our series of reports, we decided to come to Washington, D.C. Homelessness is a major problem here. We talk with legislators about possible solutions, and we talk with those who are trying to get the homeless back on their feet. Mitch Snyder is probably the nation's #1 activist for the homeless. He gained national attention a few years ago when he went on a hunger strike. Since November, Mitch himself has been living on the streets, trying to get the attention of Congress and the American people focused on the homeless issue. He says a great many Americans are homeless for a simple reason: a lack of affordable housing.
People who are on fixed incomes, people who are on modest incomes, people who make minimum wage. In most parts of the country, they're very hard-pressed to find affordable housing.
There are many other reasons people resort to the streets. Depending on who you talk to, 30 to 80% of the homeless have mental problems. They're on the streets because of deinstitutionalization. Others are homeless due to unemployment or drug and alcohol problems. For years, homeless Americans have been referred to as bums, hobos, and winos. But the executive director of the Fort Wayne Rescue Mission, Reverend Gus Parris, says those perceptions are dead wrong.
These are not winos. These are not street people who can get a job but don't want to. These are people who simply have tragic experiences in their lives and because of it have nowhere to turn.
Congressman Andrew Jacobs of Indianapolis says many of the nation's homeless are average people who've just caught a bad break.
And the great majority of people who are on the streets and homeless aren't there because they're lazy. They have willing hands. They just can't swim to Japan to get their jobs back.
Mitch Snyder says there's no such thing as a typical homeless person. They come from all backgrounds.
There's no predictable type. I would not be surprised at some point to encounter you out on the street. I know a Washington Post reporter who's homeless. I know a judge who's homeless. I know a psychiatrist who's homeless. The truth is that it can happen to just about anybody, and that's what's got us so scared. I mean, that's the truth that we don't want to come to grips with.
25-year-old Barry Bruce grew up in Baltimore. He's been living on the streets of Washington for the past 5 years.
A lot of people who end up homeless had lives and had family and had relatives, and they've been shortchanged to this. You know, they've been, from a series of misfortunes, they've lost all this, and they ended up in the gutter, or they ended up on the street.
Ronald King is originally from Dallas, Texas. He became homeless after a failed romance and legal problems. Is it a painful experience?
Very painful. Everybody wants to have a nice house and kids.
Benjamin Franklin Jones says he was discharged from the Army without cause. Since 1984, he sat in this box near the White House by day and slept on the streets at night.
It's cold, it's hard. I seen my share of hungry days. And it's extremely miserable, in other words.
Tomorrow night in part 2 of my series, I'll take a close-up look at homelessness right here in Fort Wayne.
And coming up, money expert Steve Crowley reports that under the new tax laws, yachts and RVs are defined as homes. He says you can take advantage of that.
And in just a moment, Maureen Ty says tomorrow should be another nice day. Her weather is coming up next. According to homeless activist Mitch Snyder, more people are living on the streets of America now than ever before. Tonight in part 2 of my special series on the homeless problem, we take a close-up look at homelessness in Fort Wayne. Washington, D.C. is a city with a homeless problem. Street people are extremely visible, camping out on the lawn of the U.S. Capitol, sleeping on park benches near the White House. But how about Fort Wayne? Reverend Gus Parris is the executive director of the Fort Wayne Rescue Mission.
We have a problem with homeless people, but not on the scale of Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, and we would be less than honest if we said we did, because we just don't have that many people.
Here in Fort Wayne, there are several places the homeless can turn to for help. The rescue mission is funded by the United Way and by donations from churches and local citizens. It has bed space for 90 men. The women's division has room for about 20 ladies and children. The mission provides more than just meals and shelter to its residents. Reverend Parris prides himself on the people who came to the mission down and out and have turned their lives around. Richard Travis checked in 2 years ago with drug and alcohol problems. Today, he's a member of the rescue mission staff, helping those who are going through what he once experienced.
I tell you what, I'm giving back a little bit when I was given. And, I mean, not many people can do that.
Carl Wilmot's life has come full circle. He too came to the mission with drug and alcohol problems, and his marriage fell apart. After 2 years of rehabilitation, Carl is now a staff member. He has a new life, and last month took a new bride.
I have lost everything. I've lost a family. I've lost my sons like I'd never have again. But I've gained also. God developed me another family.
Eugene Ganaway moved to the mission after his mother died, and he was left without a home.
If I leave here now, I ain't got nowhere else to go. So I got to make the best of this, you know.
Steve Jackson is 71. He used to live in a retirement home, but moved to the mission because he enjoys the company.
And having this fellowship and this guidance, it's given me some meaning to my life. It's helped me immeasurably.
People with a source of income like Steve pay a monthly rent to stay at the mission. The others lodge free of charge. Some homeless people are taken in at the Salvation Army's Adult Rehabilitation Center. Major Paul Fuqua says Fort Wayne does have a homeless problem.
I think if we've got one person that's homeless, we got a problem. I don't know that I could say we got this, and this many, but we do have enough people that see us off and on that it becomes a problem, yes.
For the past 36 years, Virginia Schrantz has opened her house to anyone looking for food, clothes, a night's sleep, occasionally even money to help pay utility bills. Miss Virginia, as she's known, says she comes across people who are very desperate.
It was during a cold winter, and this little old man said he was going out and throw a brick through a window downtown someplace so he could get into jail, and it's warm there, and he'd get food.
On a summer night in Fryman Square, you can find people sleeping on park benches or perhaps under a tree. But where do these folks go when the weather gets colder? Are there homeless people living on the streets of Fort Wayne in the winter? We tried to find out. Photographer Ray Stoip and I spent a night looking for homeless people under bridges and railroad overpasses, in parks and abandoned buildings. But more than 2 hours of searching turned up nothing. Homeless activist Mitch Snyder, who lives on the streets of Washington, D.C., says that is not surprising.
No, I'm not surprised at all, because if you could have found somebody, so could the police, and so could the wind and the cold and the rain and the snow. If you're out on the street, the one rule of thumb is that you've got to be invisible. You've got to be well hidden, because if you're not, you're either liable to be harassed or you're liable to be hurt.
Local officials agree Fort Wayne does have a homeless problem, although it's mild when compared to other bigger cities. They agree on something else, too. They say as the economy here gets better, more and more people across the country will flock to Fort Wayne looking for work. If they can't find those jobs, many of them could find themselves on the streets.
Next summer, you're going to see a lot of people on the streets in this town.
And what is going to happen is they'll be coming to places like the Fort Wayne Rescue Mission. So we got to be ready for that.
Reverend Parris says he's hoping to expand the men's division by 50 beds and the women's division by 20 beds, perhaps this summer. And Major Fuqua says the Salvation Army is exploring the possibility of creating a rehabilitation center for families. Tomorrow night, I'll wrap up my series by talking to lawmakers about possible solutions to the homeless problem. Still to come on News 15, money expert Steve Crowley reports on how to get back some of the cost of raising children.
But first, Maureen Ty says our string of nice days will continue.
Homeless people are everywhere. Cities like Los Angeles, New York, and Washington, D.C. have thousands of people living on the streets. The experts say Fort Wayne has a homeless problem, but it's mild by comparison. Tonight, I wrap up my special three-part series with a look at what can be done to get the homeless off the streets and back on their feet.
Some months.
Over the past 2 days, we've met Barry, Ronald, and Benjamin, as well as homeless activist Mitch Snyder. All four are living on the streets, all four for different reasons. And they are four of many. As we told you in part one of our series, at least 3 million Americans are living on the streets. So what can be done for these people? We traveled to Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. and talked with Indiana lawmakers about possible solutions to the homeless problem. Republican Senator Dan Quayle says throwing money at the problem is not the answer.
It is far more difficult than that. Believe me, if we could solve the homeless problem in America by just spending a certain amount of money, it would go through the Congress as it should in a very short period of time with a very brief debate.
But Congressman Andrew Jacobs, a Democrat from Indianapolis, sees things differently.
In the view of this administration, you can't solve problems by throwing money at them if the problems are education, health, and the homeless. You can solve problems very nicely by throwing money at them if the problems are military procurement, foreign aid, and the farm program.
Quayle believes much of the solution must come from the state and local level.
To solve the homeless problem in Fort Wayne will require different working relationships, different responses than it will to solve the homeless problem in New York or Los Angeles. The homeless problem in my hometown of Huntington will be a different response than it will be even in Fort Wayne or in New Orleans. So you have to realize that the federal government can only do so much.
That view is shared by a number of people, including Mitch Snyder, Reverend Gus Parris of the Fort Wayne Rescue Mission, and 4th District Congressman Dan Coates. But most everyone agrees the search for a solution will not be easy.
I don't think there's a magic formula in dealing with this. I do believe that we need to look at the totality of the situation. There are many causes and many reasons why people are homeless. If we simply assume that it's because there isn't enough federal money available, I think we miss the solution.
Mitch Snyder says if the federal government is serious about helping homeless people, it must take 2 steps immediately. First and foremost, provide affordable housing.
You can't expect the private sector to do it because if you're a developer or realtor and your choice is to build a condominium in which you stand to make $50,000 or $60,000 a unit, or an affordable project for low or moderate income people in which you can expect to make $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000, what's your choice going to be?
Snyder says the government also needs to develop shelters for the homeless in cities across the nation and establish community-based housing programs for the elderly and mentally ill who require special care. Over the past few months, Congress has been taking a close look at the homeless issue. It's already appropriated $50 million toward the homeless and is now considering a bill that calls for another $500 million in spending. $550 million is a lot of money, but Snyder says it would only be a small step toward providing long-term relief.
Last year, New York City spent $200 million on the homeless of New York City, and it wasn't nearly enough. And next year, they're budgeting $275 million.
Still, Mitch and others who deal with the homeless are more optimistic than they've been in a long time. They say Congress and the American people seem to be realizing there's a problem and that something needs to be done about it.
I mean, the fact that somebody sleeps on the street at night is not a very comforting fact of life.
I think the perception is changing. I think people are, whether they like it or not, are beginning to come to grips with the fact that there's large numbers of people out on the streets and that most of them don't bear much relationship at all to the old, comfortable stereotype of dirty, lazy, drunken bum.
Now, all the experts on the homeless problem say the key is to show compassion toward these people, for any of us, and there is a real sign that this thing is getting more focused. In a few weeks, they're going to have a celebrity sleep out. Actors and congressmen, including actor Martin Sheen, will be sleeping on the streets trying to get a better idea of what these people are experiencing and trying to focus more on the homeless issue. Coming up, Jay Higgins tells us about some stiff penalties handed down today against an NCAA school.
But first, Maureen Ty says rain is back in the forecast. Her weather is next.